I like that TRU-Man podcast.
Hey, could you imagine sinking into the last days of your life and realizing that you never tapped into your root, never attempted to claw your way out of the clutches of the world? Far be it from us to spend all our days dedicated to making sure somebody else's vision, program, and purpose was a success. Damn, that would be a hard realization, wouldn't it? We were not meant to live out our lives making sure somebody else's purpose was realized, while ignoring our own. We were all made to identify our own purpose and to make moves toward fulfilling it. There's no better satisfaction to a man than a life of work lived on his own purpose. Often, the fact is that we just won't let go of passion, and that's a pitfall. You know, it's a pitfall born out of fear, as I'll explain a little bit later. I think it comes from fear, right? But it's a pitfall that many a powerful man has fell into. We know that, right? It's either passion with its pitfalls or purpose with its promise. One thing we can never do is hold on to the both of them at the same damn time. Let's talk about it. The content in this video comes from my personal insights and experience gained at some point or another on my quest for purpose. So, if you can see yourself reflected in my story, that's great. That's what I'm aiming for. And if it moves you closer to finding your own purpose, it's mission accomplished. I can only speak to and from my experience as a man, and that's why I address men in particular, you know? But this channel is open to all, so come, listen, and vibe with us, and you're welcome to give your feedback. Now on to this content. A man's purpose exists in a dimension like a free radical waiting to be attached to a host. But the host, it has to be in the same dimension for one to bind to the other. As an analogy, let's think about it this way. A male has sperm, right? And a female has eggs. But they exist in two separate dimensions, the sperm in the male and the egg in the female. That is, until the sperm is moved into the dimension of the egg, permissively of course, and when the sperm moves into the womb of the female, the egg has the chance to be fertilized. But until then, they remain in separate dimensions, separate bodies. The same thing with a man and his purpose. In order for a man to find his purpose, he must move into the body or the dimension where his purpose exists, and only then can he be near it to fertilize his purpose with the root of his awareness. All right. That dimension is called the third dimension. It's one man, one purpose, one life. No buy one, get one free. It's one for one. A man has to go get his purpose in the third dimension. This concept of purpose is elusive for all too many men, but it is the most critical feature of a man's existence, because if he leaves this world without it, he will have missed the opportunity at forging a lasting legacy based on his purpose. This will be another cornerstone message on the TRU-Man podcast channel, so a listen to the end on this one is recommended. Would you say you have a good handle on what drives you, on what motivates you on a day-to-day basis? Or does it seem like you are helping to fulfill somebody else's plan, somebody else's vision, somebody else's goals, somebody else's purpose? Do we know what's at the root of what moves us to do what we do? And how do we know whether we're on our purpose or not? Is a job a purpose? If we have found riches, is that finding purpose? Is a relationship or filling a certain role within a relationship our purpose? This is a conversation between men here. Whatever the case, purpose is a man's duty alone to find. Nobody can do it for us. Before we go deep into discussing a man's purpose, we must first dive into something, and that is the three dimensions of a man's existence. Oh yes, it's esoteric talk, but it's necessary. Let's get into it. These are my personal insights and thoughts, okay? There are three dimensions to a man's existence. And a man's purpose, as I see it, happens to be access from the third dimension. Right? let's talk about dimensions 1, 2, and 3. The first dimension is the natural or carnal dimension. It is the dimension of the self, where the ego rules. We like ego, right? Ego serves us both in positive and in negative ways. We are born into the first dimension with this ego, and we all operate in this dimension to one degree or another for all of our days. We can't shed it entirely, but we can and should work to progress beyond it. We find that a man's lowest inclinations and his most base intentions are born from this first dimension, but so are our natural humanistic instincts, as well as the innate sense of care and concern we show for others. So, empathy is also seated in this dimension. When you see people who lack empathy, they kind of stand out. It's likely because empathy was corrupted at some point in their development in this first dimension. If we're looking at what is credited to Abraham Maslow in his hierarchy of needs pyramids, the first 4 stages of his pyramid, physiological needs, safety needs, belonging, love, and esteem, would have their genesis in this first dimension. And these are the stages where things like empathy are developed. Maslow understood this flow when he talked about primary and secondary needs of a person. He even talked about the meta motivation people show in a desire to get better. Now we'll talk a little bit more about meta motivation when we get into the third dimension. I noticed what Maslow failed to do was to place his hierarchy of needs into dimensions as we are doing here. Okay? Let's go on. In this first dimension or natural realm, we identify and satisfy all the base level needs for a man's existence. A man whose needs are not fully satisfied in this dimension, or who stay base only in this dimension as his primary level of personal development and hasn't evolved out of it, remains in kind of an adolescent stage. The biggest danger of this dimension is being stunted or stuck without growing beyond it. It's likely that psychopaths and sociopaths are created or formed in this dimension or never grow out of this dimension. Not to say everyone who doesn't develop out of this dimension fits that mold, but it's likely that this is where it unfolds at. But this is also the dimension where we recognize genius, right? Anyway, this dimension is necessary and important because it houses our natural law, and it's the springboard to the other 2 dimensions. This first dimension is where our baseline levels of awareness, identity, and esteem are formed. And that's consistent with what Maslow theorized. On to the second dimension. The second dimension is what I call the industrial dimension. Now, Maslow does not discuss this or present a framework for it. The second dimension is a resource-focused dimension in which world goods are manufactured and what's needed to sustain human life is produced. And so economy is formed in this dimension. This dimension forms the basis from which we work, play, love, politic, and compete. It's a market-based dimension. Policies are formed in this dimension. We make alliances and wage war from this dimension. Money and power are central in this dimension. The key characteristics of this dimension is the fight for power, the fight for control. This is a fight for control of resources, both raw and human. It's not hard to see that when the darker side of our humanity from the first dimension meets with the drive for control and power from the second dimension, this forms the basis for war and human conflict. In this realm, the ego is an important driver for a man's push for conquest and relevance. Man needs ego to compete. The ego, both individual and the group collective ego, is a catalyst and channel through which we shape social behavior. However, once a man or society as a whole realizes the limitations of this second dimension and has a desire to move or grow beyond it, develop our society beyond the second dimension, or as Maslow referred to as a man's meta motivation, man looks for higher meaning and purpose. He seeks out the third dimension. Now, the third dimension is our focus for this discussion. It is the dimension of enlightenment, the dimension of the divine. It's a value-based dimension. I call it the hidden realm, the mothership of all creativity. It's an empowered dimension, the dimension where we find our purpose. This dimension is ruled by the divine universal mind, some people refer to as God. And for those who believe, no, God does not live in the third dimension. That's a discussion for another topic. It seems to me that Maslow failed to properly weight the element of transcendence in terms of importance to a man's personal development. However, the third dimension is the dimension of inspired thought. This value-based dimension is where we come to fully know thyself. Remember, the baseline levels of self-awareness we discuss, they're born in the first dimension, but they mature and are seasoned in this third dimension. The ego can be an impediment to and diminishes in the third dimension. Let me say that again. The ego can be an impediment to, and it also diminishes in the third dimension. One telltale sign that a man is not operating from or has tapped into the third dimension is the high presence and activity of his ego. So, as you can see, we practice higher order thinking in the third dimension. We also harness our creative energy, access the vault of universal truth, and for brief moments of time, we're able to shed the iron shackles of our lower selves from the first and second dimensions. Each dimension has pros and cons, and each dimension has tripwires and trapdoors. We can get lost and waste a whole lifetime in one dimension if we aren't thoughtful and balanced about how we move through life. That's why having a roadmap is important. Roadmaps help us stay balanced and keep us in line with our true purpose. Each man needs a roadmap for himself that directs his internal compass and guides his behaviors. Okay, a lot of men say they use religious scriptures as a roadmap, and okay, that's fine. The roadmap we are talking about, though, is a personalized roadmap for each man that he develops as he gathers knowledge about himself and as he accesses his purpose from the third dimension. A man who taps into the third dimension can put both hands on the steering wheel of his purpose, and if he so chooses, overcomes his passions. This man elevates his purpose to center stage. Now, some of us, we have a challenge with this, right? Some of us will allow our passions to rule over our purpose. And in this case, a man who allows that is the one who can be stuck in the second dimension. You know, we should not underestimate how difficult it is for men to separate from the matrix, right? To separate from the second dimension. We were all groomed to be attached to it and allured by it, or even intoxicated by it. It's so very much like the story of a man's sperm. Out of the whole universe of sperm cells that have ever been produced by men, not to get in a funny type of conversation, but there have been just a fraction of all the sperm produced that have actually made it to fertilize its purpose, which is the egg. A fraction. See, each sperm had a purpose, right? But not each sperm reached its purpose. And the same goes for men. All men have a purpose, but not all men reach their purpose, right? That's why we have to go into the third dimension for it, because it's not easy, but it's worth it. Men, if we live to see it, we will all have like a dark night of the soul that checks our ego. No matter what our status is or standing is in the world, each man is going to come up on this type of dark night of the soul. It comes for each and every man. Believe me when I tell you that it is best to face that time, that moment, that intersection with purpose in hand and a roadmap, right? That'll save our awareness, self-awareness, our mental state. You know, a lot of men who face those dark moments of the soul without being seated in the bedrock of purpose, they lost their minds, you know? So to that select group of men who will take on the campaign to go into the third dimension and secure a life of purpose, I salute you and I partner with you on that quest. We can think of what has been presented so far as like a rough sketch of the third dimension. This won't be the end of our conversation in regards to the dimensions, but this is to present a starting basis point for our understanding, right? Each of us are on some type of mission in this world. For some, it's a mission to survive. For others, it's to figure out how we make sense of the world around us. For the man of value, it is a mission on finding our purpose and building value from it. You know, we can feel like refugees in our own land. It seems that in this very complex world that we live in, many of us actually do feel like refugees. You know, a refugee is someone who flees poor conditions in their homeland and goes looking for a better place to live or for a better quality of life. Truth is, few of us can really move entirely to another country. So we are faced with having to change the country in our minds, to change the laws of our mind. We will literally have to change how we move on the ground where we live. These days, more and more men are exploring options outside the borders of their home country, looking for better lands, looking for a better quality of life, right? Shout out to the passport bros. But that's a small percentage of men overall. What do the rest of men do? We change the country in our minds, how we move on the ground where we live. The level of exploration by men outside the boundary lines of their home country will be more, except that this world has a way of putting Velcro on the back of a man. So it's hard for him to tear himself away from whatever holds him in place, whatever holds him back, whatever holds him down. The right to move from land to land is regulated by rule of law, but the right to change the laws of our mind is exclusively in our hands. We're the governors of what transpires inside our minds. That is, unless we cede control of our minds to another person or external influence. The biggest and most precious freedom a man can have and exercise in this world is not the freedom to travel, it is the freedom to think. So, why do we seek purpose? Why do we want purpose? Because purpose acts like a compass for a man's life. It steers our ship on the right course. Having purpose keeps us from walking aimlessly or chasing the wrong things, pursuing the wrong people, becoming prisoner of the wrong passion. Purpose also helps us lay claim and take control over our direction in life, including the activities and people we engage with. This is why we place purpose over passion, purpose over people, purpose over profits. There's a concept in business called good, fast, cheap. It goes like this. We can have it good and fast, but not cheap. Or we can have it cheap and good, but not fast. Or we can have it fast and cheap, but not good. There may be some personal relationship application on this concept. I'm not exactly sure, but we cannot have all three at the same time. Going into the third dimension and securing our purpose will not be fast or cheap, but it will be good. The work we put into solidifying our value from our purpose in this world will not be fast or cheap, but it will be good. If you are working towards your purpose and value, be patient with yourself and keep working. Your good is coming. And even once you get to good, keep working. Good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good gets better and your better gets best. Anybody remember that saying? The challenges we are facing today in this world has many people placing their proverbial heads in the sand and praying it all blows over. But it's not going to blow over. In reality, the coming months, even years, maybe decades will be very challenging and difficult for many people and many families. Most likely, we will see more poverty as a society and a world, and that will mean more crime, potentially. And the effect of that will push down the quality of life to the point where government-sized solutions are needed. Basically, we're already at that point, right? Purpose acts as a life preserver of sorts when chaos forms around us. Having purpose acts as a rudder steering a man's boat in choppy waters. Remember we talked about the dark night of the soul and how purpose might position a man to better deal with that when it comes? Having purpose keeps us walking straight ahead when the wind is in our face instead of at our backs. We know that all men work on some level. Some of us at jobs that we hate, but we all work. We work voluntarily and involuntarily. Some men work just to get a paycheck. Some work to support a lifestyle. Some men work just to pay off debts. Some men work to impress others by what they're able to earn and get and produce and purchase, and to fund their social life. And others to support whatever passion he may have. But we all work. We often work chasing that white rabbit of success, a success we pursue just to get validated in the eyes of other people. That's our ego working. The best we can hope is to have a toolkit to manage that ego, because it is forever with us. It was with us at birth, and it will be with us when we go. Very few men can master their ego. At best, we can manage it. When it's all said and done, impressing others won't matter. But when we achieve something from the bedrock of knowing our purpose, it rings different than worldly success. Don't get me wrong. Worldly success has its place. I like nice things like the next man. But the satisfaction we get from fulfilling our purpose is like a gold medal created in the center of our soul. Our campaign for purpose doesn't have to look good. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be wildly successful. It just has to be ours. This brings us to man's biggest challenge. We kind of touched on it and tapped around it a little bit so far, but we've talked positive trade-offs before. We did in the Focus No Distractions video, but it's also possible to make negative trade-offs. Sometimes we trade off pursuing our purpose for an attachment to a passion. We let the ego rule us instead of ruling over the ego. For many men, it's harder to put aside his ego, and it takes a proactive person to take on that challenge. But seriously, many men trade off purpose for passion because 1, passion is pleasurable, and 2, purpose requires discipline and hard self-work to take the reins. Many of us don't want to do that work. The roadblock to the third dimension for most men is essentially an unwillingness to take rule over his ego. It's the reluctance to move from pleasure to discipline, from passion to purpose. The roadblock keeps us stuck in that second dimension, fumbling through a life of pitfalls. We hold on to passion as if afraid that if we let go, we will drown without relevance. Remember, we said a minute ago that ego is an important driver of a man's push for conquest and relevance, but is also the hurdle over which many men fail to jump in order to solidify their purpose. and let go of passion. When we understand the role our ego plays in our survival, then we can check it and make it work for us and not against us. Inside every man are the seeds of purpose that he can use to create that life of value. Our challenge is to overrule our ego as we go forth to live lives of purpose. We would want to avoid being prisoners of passion. We were not born into a system that promotes the liberty of our minds. We can know that, or even to have the freedom of our thoughts. Today, it seems every effort is made to pollute our minds with outright mad stuff. The messages, the images, and examples of manhood that we see in media and in our broader world, they're distorted images and examples. Often they are ego drivers that invite us to be consumers looking for our next conquest. William Rodin, he wrote a book some years ago called $40 Million Slaves. And, in that book, he laid out a case that essentially noted that highly paid athletes were lacking something. They lacked purpose. And that lack of purpose was the driver for many of the perils that they faced. Listen, no one people or group has a leg up on purpose, right? As a matter of fact, a man without a clearly defined purpose, no matter rich or poor, is a prisoner of his passion. We can be prisoners to whatever demands our attention, whatever demands our involvement or our energy. A passion can be anything that keeps us from being focused on the purpose that we have. What did Hov say in Big Pimpin'? I got no passion, I got no patience, and I hate waiting. At the end of the day, the value of a man is who he is when he is stripped of all those worldly things, people, passion, and possessions. It's essentially who he is when he is stripped of his ego. The problem is that we are never too long without our complement of people, possessions, and passions. They occupy the forefront of our attention, and we love it. And all too often, we die for it. The things we put ourselves in danger to lose is kind of boggling.
I like that TRU-Man podcast.
We've brought into the idea that relationships, sex, and marriage will bring us satisfaction. And certainly, we can attest that to some degree they do bring us satisfaction. But we engage with those only to find out along the way that our bliss is often temporary and fading. Sometimes the reason a man is single is to give him a moment, a window to pivot into his purpose before his next distraction comes, whatever her name may be. All right? Our true fulfillment as men comes from living in our purpose. Men of value live our existence from a base of purpose as opposed to a base of passion. We put purpose over passion. There is no better feeling for a man than the admiration that comes from being clothed in our authentic purpose, rooted in our authentic purpose. Once the gleam and shine of a relationship or connection wears off, the question will always rise up. Was that man on his purpose? Or we need to be asking ourselves, was I on my purpose in the midst of that relationship, or is this an opportunity for me to find it? If the answer was no, then that could be the reason why respect had faded in a relationship and a relationship died. Some of us are dealing with losing respect and losing relationships right now. But listen, when a relationship fails, it opens up a door of opportunity for a man to focus in on his purpose and to elevate it over his passion. Each man will face this moment of intersection during his lifetime, and it's up to him on which direction he chooses to go. This is every man's quest in life. Will you take the challenge? This is the hard part, man, because it's ours to accept that when we aren't on our purpose, we're just offering passion in the moment, and eventually that wears off. purpose wins over passion every day. We are all going to come to the end of our days at some point. And when it's time to lay our cards on the table and lay down our hand, do we want a handful of aces of purpose or hearts of passion? We're close to the end here. In the book The Alchemist, Paul Coelho related finding a man's purpose to him pursuing his personal legend. Mr. Coelho is now worth about $500 million, mainly off the popularity of his breakthrough novel. That's pretty impressive, insane even. And yes, I know his novel is a 1 in a million, but who is to say that your purpose is not? Our truer liberty and better country may just come from finding our own personal legend and our own $500 million purpose in life. May I suggest that we go on a 30-day quest and focus inward, using that time to take personal inventory on where we are with all the measures of our purpose. During this time, we want to challenge ourselves to put distance between us and anything that doesn't bring us closer to true purpose. Many of us are mystery men, even to ourselves. So, this exercise will put us on the path to unearth the man inside. All it takes is moving toward purpose over passion. The DNA of a man of value resides in us all. Believe in yourself, that you will be able to bring out into the world the value you were designed to make from your purpose. We are here to place purpose over passion. This has been Ray Black, your life coach of encouragement with TRU-Man podcast, where we reflect on the work and worth of a man, and we focus on gold paradigms and diamond principles. Let's go.